Hello, period 4 and period 6, algebra 1 and honors algebra 1. We're going to do the same guided practice problems today for lesson 9.3b, where we are going to find the zeros of a function by graphing. This is really no different than what you did on yesterday's lesson. We're just using different notation now. Instead of our equation notation that shows y's and x's, we will use function notation, where f of x is the same thing as y. So for example 4, we're going to take a look at finding the zeros of the function by graphing. For the equation f of x is equal to x squared plus 6x minus 7. We're going to rewrite this equation in with a more familiar format, replacing f of x with y. So y is equal to x squared plus 6x minus 7. To find the zeros of the function, we're going to set y equal to 0. That's going to give us the x-intercepts that we'll place on our graph of our parabola. And again, that is known also as the zeros of the function because y is 0. We're going to use our x method to factor this equation, set equal to 0. So we have, for our factored form, using our x method, x plus 7 times x minus 1 is equal to 0. When we set each of those factors equal to 0, we will find that x takes the values of both negative 7 and 1. Then we begin the process of creating our table of values, where we will find 3 points. We will not find 5. 3 will be sufficient. We'll find 3 points that will define our parabola graph. So we're going to take the zeros of our function, y and negative 7. We put that as our biggest and our smallest value in our table of values, 1 and negative 7. And of course, we've already discovered that when f of x, which is the same thing as y, is 0, x has the value of 1 and negative 7. So notice that I have no work here in my table of values because I already know that when x is 1, my y is 0. When x is negative 7, my y is 0, and that comes from up here when I set each factor equal to 0. I will need to work out my vertex x and y coordinate. To find the vertex, I'm going to know it's exactly halfway in between 1 and negative 7. So right here, I'm adding up 1 plus negative 7, dividing by 2, and that's going to give me my vertex x value of negative 3. Again, we're averaging those 2 points, 1 and negative 7, to find what is the point exactly halfway in between. And to average numbers, we add up the numbers in our list and divide by the number of numbers in our list. In this case, there are 2 numbers we're averaging. That's why we're dividing by 2. When we place negative 3 into our table of values as our x coordinate, we then work out our f of x, which is the same thing as our y coordinate. And we find out that when x is 3, f of x, or y, is negative 16. Now we plot those 3 points, and this is the graph it creates. It's a parabola opening upward. And that graph then tells us that the solution to the equation set equal to 0 is negative 7 and 1. We see it right here on the graph. Those x-intercepts, the zeros of the function, solve the equation when f of x is set equal to 0. So there is our answer based on our graph. Guided practice 4. We're going to do the same kind of problem on guided practice 4. We're going to find the zeros of f of x is equal to x squared plus x minus 6. We'll use graphing as our method to show those values. So we're starting here with rewriting this equation, replacing f of x with replacing f of x with y, and then replacing y with 0 so we can find the zeros of the function. We're going to factor that into x plus 3 times x minus 2. Since 3 times negative 2 gives us our negative 6, and our inside 3x plus our outside negative 2x, 3x plus negative 2x is our 1x here. Notice I didn't draw the x underneath to figure that out. That was simple enough to think through mentally. All right, then when I set each of these factors equal to 0 and solve them, I find my x values are negative 3 and 2, and that is the solution to the equation. But again, on this lesson, we are practicing showing these solutions on a graph. So we're going to make a table of values with negative 3 and 2 as the zeros of our function. And then we're going to find a point exactly halfway in between negative 3 and 2. That's a little hard to think mentally, so we're going to add up negative 3 plus 2, divide it by 2 to average those 2 points. Remember, when we're averaging numbers, we add up the numbers in the list, divide by the number of numbers in the list. There are 2 numbers in the list this time. So that gives us a value of -1/2 for the x-coordinate of our vertex, which is going to be down here. I work out then what is the value of my f of x, which is the same thing as y, and here I am working that out, and I get -6 1/4. So I'm going to plot those 3 points. There's my -3, 0, there's my 2, 0, and here is my -1/2, -6 1/4, my vertex. It does not show up as part of the solution to my quadratic equation. It's simply the vertex that happens to be on this parabola. This is where my solutions are. These are the zeros of the function. The x-intercepts are the values that solve the equation 0 = x² + x - 6. All right, so we're going to summarize what we just found out. This really isn't new information, but we want to make sure you understand all of the terminology relating the solutions of equations, x-intercepts of graphs, and zeros of the function. So over here we have this graph, and it is the graph of the parabola y = -x² + 8x - 12. Notice it has two x-intercepts, 2, 0, and 6, 0. Those x-intercepts do indicate what the value of this equation set equal to 0, when y is 0, what the solution is. Well, based on the x-intercepts, the solutions are 2 and 6. The solutions are 2 and 6 based on those x-intercepts. We also can say that those are the zeros of the function f of x is equal to -x² + 8x - 12. Notice these equations all have -x² + 8x - 12, and they all have solution values of 2 and 6 in all 3 cases. So there's different ways we can talk about the solutions to our quadratic equation. We're noticing that on our graphs that wherever our parabolas are, it's where that graph intersects or crosses over the x-axis that provides the solution to our equation set equal to 0. Okay, that is it for our guided practice on this section, and now it's time to go ahead and start your homework.